Good evening, listeners. Welcome to the Books and Stuff podcast, where I chat about life events and books that I read or that are recommended to me, and hopefully just bring up some important conversations about life and society. I'm your host, Alex Griffiths, and as usual, today we'll be talking about the most recent novel that I've read. It is called Keeper in Me by Richard Wagamese. This is the book here. It's called Keeper in Me. First, I want to talk a little bit about the author. His name is Richard Wagamese, and after reading this, I know that he's read other books, and this definitely makes me want to go purchase those and give them a read too. So it's a great novel. Richard is Aboriginal, like the character in this story, and it really makes me thrilled for the Aboriginal community to have his work presented. Especially in a school setting. This was given to me in an English 12 class to read. And I don't think I've ever read anything by an Aboriginal author before, not on purpose, obviously, but I think that just shows that we're really putting an effort into mainstreaming their work as well. Richard is a resident of Kamloops, BC, so shout out to beautiful BC. Love that we're discussing another Canadian author. Turning back to the story, I'll do a little intro of the book, and then we will probably go through a few questions that were posted on the website. So the main character in the book is called Garnet Raven. At 3 years old, he's removed from his family, who are Ojibwe people, from the White Dog Reserve in Ontario. He spends around 22 years, I think, separated from his birth family. He's put into foster homes and then eventually just ends up on his own. And he actually does end up going to jail for a few years. And after his sentence, he's reconnected with his family. And the story just kind of shows his journey to relearning his Aboriginal traditions and family dynamics and really just finding himself again. It was a very good novel. Can't wait to discuss it a bit more. I at some points really felt very emotionally involved and touched by some of their experiences. So we'll get into that a bit more. We're going to pull up our first question from a fellow reader. Their question is, can you identify personally with any of the characters? What moments in your life were similar or not to them? This is by Tracy. Thank you, Tracy, for the question. So do I identify personally with any of the characters? Yes. I'm specifically going to talk about one moment where I'm going to talk about Alice, who is Garnet's birth mother in the story. She's often just referred to as Ma in the book. You don't really get to know her until Garnet actually physically meets her for the very first time since he was 3 years old, which was crazy moving. And then as they spend time together, you kind of get to hear a bit more of her story. There's one moment in the book where Garnet is sharing what he heard was like for his mother and father when they were taken away, him and his siblings. And he shares, I'm going to share a quote from the book here. He shares, both of them started hanging out with the drinking crowd in Kenora and Miniki, trying to forget their hurt in a bottle. And that's end of page 71, if you want to look that up and have another look. Alice eventually does stop drinking and finds her way out of addiction and begins her path to spirituality, but I can really relate to Alice and her struggle with substance use. I myself have struggled with addiction, and I am 4 years clean. And I really understand that phrase, trying to forget your hurt in a bottle. I honestly don't even think I can sum up addiction in another way. I remember hiding behind substances, and it just really, it can help you numb so you don't have to deal with it. This is something that a lot of people that struggle with feel. And you feel like it's saving you from all of your feelings. You don't have to deal with them. But in the end, you take a look around and you have nothing left and you weren't saved. And it takes a lot to get yourself out of that. And I'm happy in the story that she did. But we do differ because my partner started his recovery with me and is also still clean. Whereas Alice, unfortunately, her husband stayed in addiction until his death. So I can only imagine how hard that was for her and him. You know, and I think it's so interesting that substance abuse is brought up in this novel. I don't think it's interesting. I think it makes perfect sense, actually. But there is a huge stereotype with Aboriginal people being linked to addiction and alcoholism, and they're really held under that umbrella. And this book kind of shows why. Like, their kids were taken away from them. Like, I honestly couldn't think of a better excuse to start drinking. You know, and this story is very common reality for a lot of Aboriginal families, if not most. You know, and once a family dabbles in the cycle of addiction, like, it's passed on. It's such a hard cycle to break. I think it's amazing that it's talked about, and yeah, those are my thoughts on that. So I did, you know, relate to Alice in that sense. I've never had my family taken away, so I can only imagine and really feel the feelings that were said in the book as far as that. But, you know, I know what it's like to want to forget some problems that you have going on. If you want to talk about that too, the blog is open on the website, so you can leave some comments on that. And then we're going to move on to the next question. Where is the story set? Is this a fictional story? That's a good question, Brian. So where's the story set, and is it a fictional story? So from my understanding, the book's based in Ontario from like the 60s to the 80s, 1960s to the 80s. This story is actually loosely based on the actual author's own life experiences. However, the characters are fictional. But even though it's fictional, I think it's important that we remember that this story like rings true for most Aboriginal Canadian family experiences. You know, so even though it's fictional, I feel like it's a very real story. But let's think about that time frame for a minute. So what was going on then? So early 60s, he's about 3 and he gets taken away from his family. So we've all heard the term the 60s scoop by now, have we not? And this is exactly what it was. The children were being deemed unsafe by the government with their Aboriginal families living their traditional way of life, and were removed and sent to residential schools, foster homes, Canadian families. They were removed from families, homes, tradition, and culture. And in this story, he didn't go to residential school. He did go to a series of foster homes. But, you know, in the last few years, like, we've been hearing how bad and hearing the truth about how awful the residential schools were. So, you know, this was a time of hate. It was a time of assimilation. It was a time of death for Aboriginal communities. So much damage was caused. So I think it's great that this is being given in school for students to learn about. And then also we'll talk about the time frame kind of in the middle of the story when Garnet's on his own, young adult. This was maybe early 80s, very early 80s. By that time, he was an adult, mid-20s. He was living in the city. He was in with the nightlife. In the city, drugs were becoming an epidemic in the 80s, specifically cocaine. And unfortunately, that is what sent Garnet to jail, was dealing and distributing some cocaine. So that's kind of what that time frame looked like, and it really rings true to exactly everything that happens in the story. Yeah, so if you have any comments or questions on that more, you can add them to the website. And finally, we will take our last question. Melanie is asking, what was the most outstanding theme in this novel for you? What do you relate it to? I'd have to say one of the biggest themes in this novel that stuck with me pretty much the whole time of the novel was the importance of someone's culture and tradition in their lives. Like from the beginning, Garnet is living a life and he feels like a piece of his soul is missing, and he's felt this since he was young. He knew that there was something missing, and he's so out of touch with his culture, and he's trying other cultures, other religions, and none of them are working for him. He finally started on his spiritual journey when he went back to the reserve after his jail sentence. And, he finally started finding himself again through being in that community with that culture around, being taught the traditions. The amount of growth this character goes through in the book, it makes me want to start a spiritual journey right now. You really read him coming back to life. In the book, they do talk a few times about like what white people thought of their culture, and white people were saying like it's demonic, it's witchcraft, it's wrong. But in reality, like when you read about the Aboriginal ways and their way of life and their way of thinking, like it couldn't be farther from the truth. They have so much respect ingrained into their culture. It's just beautiful. Near the end of the book, on page 268, if you guys want to look this up, because this just blew my mind. There's a doctor and his wife who live on the reserve. They're Russian. He says, "That's very beautiful and very, very true. Makes me wish I was an Indian." He said this after hearing Keeper and the Raven family talk about learning life for yourself before you pass it on to your next generation. And I couldn't believe I heard someone else say that I wish I was Indian, because I have thought that to myself so many times in life. Like, I've done, research in the past. It's been a part of a lot of my projects, integrating some Aboriginal traditions, ways, medicine, those kind of things. And I've never really read of any teachings that really connected with me on that level. I was raised a certain religion when I was younger. I no longer practice it. But it was just very interesting because I felt that way for a long time, and hearing someone else say that, I didn't even know that was okay to say. And I don't know how much of that is allowed. I'm allowed to like it from afar, but I never want to be disrespectful or appropriate their culture. They're only now just getting so much back. And I just really want to respect that. But they really have such beautiful teachings and a beautiful way of life. So anyway, there's some food for thought. Overall, it was a great book. After hearing this, I hope some of you guys are curious and want to take a read for yourselves. I will be posting a new book that I'm going to read soon. And thank you for listening, and take care, everyone. Thank you.